Oren Velis didn't remember the last time he felt alive in a room full of people. On paper, he was a translator. Technically, a Xenolinguistic Systems Integration Officer, aboard the Silvera Ark, a mobile diplomatic vessel chartered by the Interstellar Unity Commission to carry out peacetime protocols following the end of the Lyran conflict. In practice, he was a ghost. A quiet shadow moving through bulkheads and conference decks, seldom noticed, mostly forgotten. But that was how Oren preferred it. After 10 years working behind voices that never belonged to him, human and Lyran alike, he'd come to understand that words could do more than convey meaning. They could conceal. They could fracture. They could kill. The worst thing he'd ever said wasn't a mistranslation. It was the truth. And he'd said it to her. The morning she arrived, the entire ship shifted. Not physically, of course. But in mood. In breath. Ardina Sil. Oren stood in the observation lift, watching as the shuttle descended into the hangar bay. His palms were damp. His throat burned. He hadn't expected this, not here. Not after all this time. He hadn't seen her since Veruin, too. The last day of the siege. When he had found her beneath the collapsed dome of the planetary observatory, barely alive, ash coating her hair like snow. They told him she had died. But there she was now. Stepping off the vessel with deliberate calm, her features unscarred, her dark gray skin illuminated by the hangar's cold artificial light. Her eyes scanned the room until they found his. And when they did, something inside him cracked wide open. Her voice, carried through the docking bay's comms, was as he remembered, low and precise, every word chosen like a stone placed in a river to shift the current. "You remember," she said. "The moment should have been impossible. Improbable. A footnote lost to bureaucratic tides. And yet it was real. She was real." Oren couldn't answer. His voice had not yet returned to him. Ardina was escorted directly to the tribunal deck. Her appearance aboard the Silvera Ark was intended to be symbolic. A gesture of goodwill. A nod to unity between the Lyrans and the United Planetary Alliance. But she had come with her own purpose. When she stepped into the chamber, flanked by two silent officers, every diplomatic delegate stopped speaking. The tribunal, a circular hall of polished obsidian and adaptive crystal panels, rose around her like a judgmental coliseum. Representatives from over a dozen species sat in high-backed chairs, their expressions masked with polite skepticism. She did not bow. She did not smile. Instead, she placed a single object on the presentation disc in front of her, a black stone, smooth as glass, carved with an ancient sigil of the Lyran Truthkeepers. Oren felt the entire room stiffen. He knew what it meant. A stone of living witness. This wasn't symbolic. This was real. "I bring testimony," Ardina said. "Not of peace. Of war. Of what was erased." The first words hit like a hammer. Then came the names. Of cities burned. Of refugees silenced. Of captains who violated ceasefires. Of orders sent in secret. And then. A pause. She turned her gaze toward the lower gallery. Toward Oren. "One voice defied the command to erase," she said. "One human chose mercy when cruelty was expected. He found me. He gave me water. He did not let me die beneath the observatory ruins." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "His name is Oren Velis." Silence fell like vacuum. Oren's body went cold. In that single sentence, Ardina had rewritten a decade of buried records. She had made him visible again. And with that visibility came danger. After the session recessed in chaos, Oren fled to the ship's lower atrium. It was quiet there. Filled with winding data trees and soft light. But even among silence, he couldn't escape the tightening in his chest. Footsteps approached. Quiet. Deliberate. He knew it was her before he turned. "You shouldn't have said my name," he murmured. "Why not?" she replied. "Was it a lie?" "Truth doesn't always help," he said bitterly. "Then they fear the wrong things." She moved closer, slow but sure, until only inches separated them. Oren could see the fine lines of her face now, the faint gold flicker of her eyes. She'd changed. There was strength in her posture now. A different kind of power. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," she said. "I never forgot." A soft pause. "They told me you died." "They tried." Her voice faltered for the first time. "I waited, years. Hoping someone would say you lived. Hoping that," she caught herself, then exhaled, the words like stones tumbling loose. "I remembered how you looked at me. Not with pity. Not with fear. Just, with eyes that didn't want me to vanish." Oren looked away. "And now you've brought me into it again." "We were always in it together," she said. "Whether we spoke or not." He didn't know what to say. So instead, he sat down beside the quiet data tree, his hands trembling slightly. "You're going to be hated for this," he whispered. "I already am," she said. "But hatred doesn't scare me anymore." She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. He wanted to touch her hand. He didn't. Not yet. The night fell with artificial dusk, and the ship grew quieter. They met again in the observatory. Not planned. Just drawn, like comets caught in the same current. She stood near the viewport, watching the slow dance of a red dwarf beyond the system's rim. "Do you remember the night under the observatory?" she asked. "You mean when we both thought we were going to die?" he replied. She smiled softly. "I was ready to. Until you said it." "What?" "That the war would end. Not today. Not tomorrow. But that it would end." He laughed quietly, the sound brittle. "I said that to make you feel better. And it did." He turned to her then. "Why me, Ardina?" Her expression sobered. "Because you never lied to me. Even when your voice shook. Even when you were afraid. I knew what you said was real." She stepped closer. "And because I loved you," she said. The words crashed through him like gravity reversed. He stared at her. "You, what?" "I loved you," she repeated. "Back then. In those few days. Maybe it wasn't wise. Or even safe. But it was true." She paused. "And maybe it still is." When she kissed him, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't rehearsed. It was like something old finishing its first breath. He kissed her back. Not because he had to. But because it had waited long enough. Later, as they stood together near the viewport, watching the stars blink and stretch across the void, she said. "You saved me once. Now I'm trying to return the favor." He leaned his head against hers. "I don't think I can survive being visible again." "Then let me be your shield," she whispered. "Just like you were mine." They stayed there for a long time. Two people between galaxies. Two people with too much history. Two people who dared, against all reason, to feel. But neither knew that in the deepest depths of the ship, encrypted transmissions were already being intercepted. Names flagged. Witness logs traced. Because when one witness speaks truth, those who fear it will always try to silence it. And they had already begun to move. Ardina Sil never thought she'd speak those names again. Not in public. Not in a tribunal filled with the same species that once tried to erase hers. But she had. And now the silence was deafening. She stood alone in her temporary quarters aboard the Silvera Ark, her body rigid with the cold stillness of consequence. No guards. No watchers. Just still, recycled air and the vague hum of the ship's engines far below. They hadn't arrested her. Not yet. Maybe they didn't know what to do with a witness too valuable to kill and too dangerous to ignore. Across the room, the black witness stone sat untouched. The sigil glowed faintly, alive, reactive, proof of memory stored in more than flesh. Lyran artifacts didn't just recall events. They felt them. Bled them. The tribunal could cross-reference its pulse signatures with battle records, voice logs, planetary vibrations. And it would match. Every lie they'd crafted about Veruin, too, every official denial, would now sit side by side with her voice, her blood, and her truth. And yet, none of that terrified her. What scared her most was that she'd said his name. Oren Velis. He hadn't known she would. She'd seen it in his face when she spoke. The fear. The betrayal. The unspoken plea, not me. Not like this. But she hadn't done it to punish him. She had done it because their truth had already been buried once. And she wouldn't bury it again. She owed him that. She owed them that. Her door chimed. She expected officers. Security. A tribunal courier with a silencing order. Instead, it was the last person she expected to see. Lior Anir. Once a frontline medic. Now a peace transition advisor, a title that meant little except that he knew how to bind wounds no one liked to look at. "May I come in?" he asked softly. Arden nodded. Lior stepped inside, his frame lean and cautious, his dark hair still damp from the ship's recycled showers. He wore no insignia, just a neutral beige uniform and the same tired eyes all healers seemed to carry. "You made a lot of people nervous today," he said gently. "That wasn't the goal," she replied. "But it was the effect." She folded her arms. "I didn't come here to comfort those who feel guilty." Lior smiled faintly. "No, you came here to end the war." "The war is over," she said. "By treaty." "Then why do you still feel like a prisoner?" Arden turned away. There it was again, that quiet ability Lior had. To see what others missed. To name truths even she avoided. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "I watched the footage," he said. "Of your testimony. The others didn't notice it. But I did." "What?" "When you said his name." Arden didn't reply. Lior's voice softened. "Your heart wasn't in anger then. It was in memory." She felt her chest tighten. "It wasn't a weapon," he continued. "It was grief. Maybe even love." Finally, she looked at him. "Then I hope they understood that." "They didn't," Lior said. "But he did." Later, Ardina found herself walking the ship's central corridor, just to breathe. She passed quiet rooms filled with diplomats whispering behind glass. Artificial gardens where artificial peace was rehearsed. A gallery of memorials to the war's dead, stone holograms that shifted when touched. She avoided the one marked Veruin, too. She didn't want to see who they remembered. Or who they didn't. She ended up in the Arboretum. It was quiet there. The ship had designed it to resemble a Lyran forest, tall silver-leaf trees, soft pulsing moss. It was never quite right. Too still. Too polished. But tonight, it gave her cover. Oren was already there. Sitting beneath a tree. She almost turned to leave, but he looked up. And didn't look away. "You came," he said. "I didn't know you'd be here. That makes two of us." They sat in silence for a moment, separated by only a few feet, and 100 unsaid things. "I shouldn't have said your name like that," she finally whispered. "Not without warning." Oren shook his head slowly. "You said it because it mattered. But it put a target on you. I've carried worse." She reached for the moss beside her, fingers pressing into its soft glow. "They'll try to twist it," she said. To say it was some emotional fantasy. A wartime illusion. Was it? He asked. She looked at him then. His eyes were the same. Dark, honest, tired. No, she said. But it would be easier if it was. Oren leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You still feel it too. Every moment, she said. He exhaled. So do I. They spent hours there. Not lovers, not prisoners, not witnesses. Just two people trying to make peace with what survived the fire. When she finally rose to leave, he caught her wrist gently. Arden, he said softly. What happens next? She turned to him, her voice quiet. I testify again. I make them see. I show them that our love wasn't betrayal. It was what peace should have been built on. Oren stood with her. His touch lingered. And when they try to silence you? Then you speak, she said. Like you did that day. Even if it costs us everything. His voice broke. I can't lose you again. Then stand beside me, she whispered. And don't let them bury what we are. The tribunal reconvened 2 days later. Arden stepped into the chamber again. This time, she wore a traditional Lyran mantle, a ceremonial robe once banned by the Alliance during the war. She wore it now not as rebellion, but as reclamation. The witness stone pulsed in her hands. I was asked, she began, why I crossed enemy lines during the siege. Why I escaped the human cell. She looked directly at the council. I didn't escape. A murmur. I was released. More murmurs. Not as an exchange. Not as a tactic. I was released by a man who should have followed orders. Who should have called his captain. Who should have left me to die. She turned toward Oren. He stood in the gallery, head high. Instead, he gave me light in a place built for endings. He didn't touch me. Didn't threaten me. He asked me my name. He gave me his. And in the dark of war, she said, we fell in love. A silence heavier than sound followed. She placed the witness stone on the center disc. It lit the room with quiet flame. You call it treason, she said. I call it truth. And this time, she didn't look away. Outside the chamber, riots broke. Not of violence, but of outrage, disbelief, tears. Some called her a liar. Others called her a prophet. A few simply whispered, maybe peace isn't made by the powerful. Maybe it begins with those who disobeyed. Arden slipped out through the side corridor, her heart hammering, not from fear, but from relief. And found Oren waiting there. He held out his hand. This time, she took it. That night, they sat together again in the arboretum, surrounded by trees that didn't quite belong, but reached anyway. They won't forgive us, she said quietly. They don't have to, Oren replied. We already did. And if we lose everything? He turned to her. Then at least we lost it for something real. She rested her head against his shoulder. I always thought love would be something soft, she murmured. Gentle. Uncomplicated. Maybe for other people, he said. She smiled faintly. But not for witnesses. No, he said. Not for witnesses. But as he pressed his forehead to hers, as their hands intertwined beneath impossible trees on a ship built by old enemies, she believed, just for a moment, that love could still grow in scorched places. Even if only for a while. Lior Enir didn't believe in ghosts. But the Silvera Ark made him wonder. Too many of its corridors were quiet when they shouldn't be. Too many conference rooms echoed with silence after secrets had been spoken. The ship was made of peace, but it had been built from the bones of war. And no one knew war's wounds like a healer. Lior had once been a battlefield medic. He'd saved soldiers with skin half melted, lungs crushed by collapsed domes, blood so dark it looked like the void outside. He hadn't forgotten any of them. Especially not the ones he couldn't save. That's why he'd accepted this new role, Peace Transition Advisor, the diplomats called it. But what he really did was listen to pain no one else had time for. So when Ardina Sil testified on the tribunal floor, and the ship's entire political machinery clenched its jaw to avoid choking, Lior did what he'd always done. He looked for the ones quietly bleeding. Her name was Cora Marin. A senior liaison for the Unity Commission. Veteran of 12 negotiation missions. Stoic. Sharp-tongued. Always dressed in diplomatic gray. Lior first noticed her the day after Ardina's second testimony, as she sat alone in the ship's central garden, hands trembling just slightly as she scrolled through tribunal feedback loops on her data screen. No one else seemed to see it. But Lior did. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. "You don't have to hide your reaction," he said gently. She looked up, startled. "What reaction?" "The one you've been swallowing since yesterday." Her eyes narrowed. "You're the ship's medic. Not a psychologist." Lior smiled. "And yet here we are." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You noticed the hand?" "I notice everything," he said. "Especially the things no one talks about." She glanced back at her screen, then shut it off. "Do you believe her?" she asked. "Arden Sil?" "Yes." Lior took a seat across from her. "I believe memory has weight." And her voice carried it. Cora folded her hands. "What if that memory breaks what little peace we've managed to hold? Then maybe the peace was built too close to collapse anyway." She didn't respond. So he added, more softly, "And what do you believe?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "I believe she's telling the truth. And it terrifies me." Over the next few days, their paths crossed more often. Not by coincidence, Lior didn't believe in those either. He found her in the cafeteria late at night, the observation deck just before lights out, the makeshift chapel-turned-mediation room where diplomats came to pray or scream in silence. He never asked why she couldn't sleep. She never asked why he always seemed to know where she was. Instead, they talked. About her early career, and his. About war zones where language failed, and places where medicine had to act faster than morals. About treaties that smelled like desperation. And eventually, about love. "I had someone once," she said one evening. "Before the war. She left when I joined the commission. Said I chose politics over us." "Did you?" Lior asked. "Yes," Cora said. "And she was right to leave." "But now?" he asked. Cora hesitated. "Now I don't know who I am when the war isn't around to define me." Lior nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why we're still alive," he said. "To figure that out." It wasn't romantic at first. What grew between them wasn't urgent or wild. It was quiet. Steady. A slow burn lit by presence more than passion. He walked her back to her quarters without ever touching her hand. She sat beside him during quiet briefings without ever leaning in. But one morning, when Cora woke late and rushed to the tribunal deck without her access ID, Lior was already waiting at the checkpoint, holding it. "How did you?" "You always forget something when you don't sleep," he said. "And you didn't sleep." She stared at him for a second too long. Then, softly, "Are you always like this?" "Only with people who carry more weight than they show." She took the ID. And that evening, when the ship dimmed its lights for artificial night, she sent him a single message. "You can come over. Just to talk. Or not talk. I don't mind either." In her quarters, surrounded by books and holoscreens and files no one ever read anymore, they sat shoulder to shoulder on the floor, backs to the wall, sharing hot tea and old pain. "They're going to try to discredit her," Cora said. "Arden." They'll say she's manipulating the tribunal. Using emotion to sway decisions. Lior nodded. I know. I should be part of that effort, she added. He turned his head. But you won't be. She met his eyes. No, she said. I won't. Something shifted between them then. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. And slowly, cautiously, he reached out, brushing her hand. She didn't pull away. The kiss was tentative. Not electric. Not rushed. Just a shared breath, lips meeting like a promise not to be broken. And when she pulled back, she whispered, "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," he said. And they stayed there, fingers intertwined, watching the soft flicker of stars through her viewport. Two people not made for fairy tales. But maybe made for each other. Of course, the peace didn't last. Rumors began to spread. Someone had leaked parts of Ardina's testimony to the media streams. Unedited. Uncensored. Cora found out first. Lior was with her when the tribunal called her into emergency session. "They think it was me," she said. "They're going to ask." "Was it?" Lior asked softly. "No," she replied. "But I wish it had been." He stared at her. "I believe you," he said. "Even if I'm the reason this whole process falls apart." He smiled faintly. "Especially then." Later that night, she returned to his quarters. He didn't say anything when he opened the door. She simply walked in, sat beside him, and leaned into his chest. "They're going to come for all of us," she said. "Arden. Oren. Anyone who believes them. They'll call it sedition. Or worse. They can call it whatever they want," Lior said. "But it's truth. And truth survives." She closed her eyes. "Even if we don't." Lior held her. "Then let's make it survive longer than we do." The next morning, she left a file on the tribunal's primary desk. No name. No code. Just one document. It contained the coordinates of a communications node used during the Veruin II siege. A node that proved the High Command had given orders to erase Ardina Sil. A node only someone like Cora would have access to. And when they questioned her that afternoon, she met every accusation with calm. "Yes," she said. "I believe Ardina Sil." "Yes," she said. "I believe Oren Velis." "Yes," she said. "I believe the war wasn't just fought with weapons, but with silence." And finally, "No," she said, "I will not apologize for telling the truth." When she was escorted from the chamber, she caught Lior's eyes across the crowd. He didn't smile. He just mouthed the words. "I love you." And she mouthed them back. Cora Marin had always believed in quiet loyalty. Not the loud kind wrapped in flags or slogans, but the kind that kept its promises in silence, when no one was watching. The kind that said, "I'll hold the line," even when the line was burning. And for most of her career, that was enough. But standing alone in the tribunal's cold debriefing chamber, wrists resting against the smooth edge of the console, Cora knew something had shifted. Not just in the galaxy, but inside her. She'd told the truth. And the truth had teeth. Outside that sealed room, headlines spiraled across planetary feeds. Witness testimony shakes Unity Council. Tribunal staff under investigation. A kiss that could collapse a peace treaty. And her name was on the short list of suspects. Someone had leaked the classified records. Someone had made the silence crack open. And everyone thought it was her. They weren't wrong. But they weren't right either. Because it hadn't been anger that drove her. Not ambition. Not rebellion. It was love. A love she hadn't expected. A love she hadn't asked for. A love that had grown slowly, then all at once, in the quiet hours with Lior Anir. But even now, even after everything they'd whispered to each other in dark rooms and early mornings, she hadn't told him the whole truth. She hadn't told him about the file. About the classified node buried in a forgotten command server on Terra 4. About the last message sent before the siege of Veruin 2, an order to erase every surviving Lyran civilian, and the name of the man who gave that order. And she hadn't told him what that man meant to her. Not yet. That night, Cora didn't go to Lior's quarters. She needed space. Not from him, but from herself. So she wandered the ship. Not as a diplomat. Not as a traitor. Just a woman walking through a place built by compromises. The Silvera arc was too clean. Too polished. But it had corners the officials forgot. Maintenance walkways. Empty rec rooms. Old comm towers. And it was there, in a rust-scented corridor behind the forward antenna arrays, that she found the one person she hadn't wanted to face. Iron Sar. He wasn't part of the tribunal. Wasn't even human. But he'd been brought in as a neutral arbiter from the Nalari Alliance. Technically royal-blooded, though he wore no crest, no rings. Just a cloak that shimmered faintly with the soft geometry of stars. And eyes that had seen too much. "You're running," he said simply. She stopped. "No, I'm thinking." Thinking is a prettier word. She crossed her arms. "What do you want?" "To ask you why." Cora didn't answer. Iron stepped closer. Not threatening. Just curious. Quiet. Unafraid of her silence. "You were supposed to vote on the testimony panel tomorrow," he said. "Now you've been disqualified." "I recused myself." "Why?" She looked at him. And then, because he was a stranger, and sometimes that made it easier, she said it. "Because the man who gave the extermination order, was my mentor." Iron blinked slowly. "And you buried that." "I buried everything," she whispered. "My doubts. My memories. My feelings." And now, she stopped. Swallowed. "Now I'm trying to choose between protecting him, or saving the only thing I believe in." Iron nodded. "And what is that?" She didn't hesitate. "Lior." She finally returned to his quarters just before ship night. He was asleep on the couch, datapads scattered across his lap, a cup of tea gone cold beside him. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him breathe. How had this happened? How had she gone from a career built on silence to a heart built on fire? She moved to sit beside him. He woke instantly, his eyes finding hers with that same calm intensity she now knew by heart. "You're here," he murmured. "I didn't know if I should be." "You always should be." And just like that, the quiet broke inside her. She told him everything. About the file. About her mentor, Admiral Kest. About the moment she found the kill order, signed in coded ink, time-stamped 2 hours before the fall of Veruin 2. And about how she had erased her own copy. Then found it again. Then handed it over. Lior didn't interrupt. Not once. And when she finished, barely breathing, he reached out, took her hand, and said, "Thank you for trusting me. You're not angry?" "I'm angry that anyone ever made you carry it alone." And then he kissed her. Not out of pity. Not out of comfort. But because she had chosen truth over safety. And he loved her more for it. The next morning, the tribunal was chaos. A new voice had entered the debate. Iron Sar. He stood in the center of the chamber, not as an observer, but as a witness. "I have reviewed the communication node recovered from the Terra 4 archives," he said calmly. "And there is no doubt. The order was real. The crime, deliberate." A hush fell over the delegates. Iron continued. "We have argued for weeks about peace. About truth. About reconciliation. But we forget something important: there is no peace without pain. And no truth without cost. He turned toward Cora. Some gave up comfort for clarity. Some chose love over loyalty. And because of that, we may yet have a future. Cora held Lior's hand tightly beside her in the back row. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because everything that had once made her afraid was now behind her. And the man she stood beside had helped her burn it down. That night, Cora returned to the Arboretum. She'd once told Lior she didn't believe in poetry. But standing beneath the false trees, with real stars beyond the glass, she finally understood what poetry was. It was this. A war survivor letting herself feel. A healer loving a woman who'd lied. And a diplomat choosing truth over legacy. Lior joined her a few minutes later. He didn't ask questions. Just wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "You stayed." And she whispered back, "I won't turn away again."